So I bought all of the new iPhones at launch, I've been testing them thoroughly since then, and here are my thoughts. This video will focus on the two Pro models. I've got another video dedicated to the rather excellent and arguably more interesting base iPhone 17, and then the third video will focus on the new Air, how it compares to the rest of the 17 lineup, and who should buy it. We'll not only cover everything that's new with the 17 Pros, but also how exactly they compare to last year's 16 Pros, including performance, speaker, battery, and camera comparisons. And hopefully this should help you decide whether or not to upgrade this year. So let's start with the design, which Apple disappointingly left stagnating for the past 6 years with their Pro iPhones. But finally, we actually have a new design that just about changes enough aesthetically to feel somewhat fresh. The new camera bump, or plateau as Apple calls it, looks pretty good to me personally, though I am aware I probably like it just because it's different and I was desperate for change. I do like that the phones rock on a flat surface a little bit less now though. The new colours may also grab your attention, especially this cosmic orange colour, which you'll either love or hate. The white option is secretly the best colour this year, but the white iPhones are always stunning and yet get slept on. I do wonder whether Apple choosing not to include a black option this year will come back to bite them, although sales of the new 17 Pros are still off to a good start. I'll personally be annoyed if Apple introduces a black 17 Pro in the springtime, but let me know in the comments what you think the best colour option is this year. But the important changes aren't in the visuals, it's the new materials. We no longer have Apple's tough titanium frame, and they've instead reverted back to aluminium, a change necessary to facilitate Apple's new thermal management system. Aluminium is a much better thermal conductor, and with the new vapor chamber, Apple was really focusing on maximizing performance. So we'll see if this decision has paid off in the performance section later. To compensate for this, Apple has upped the scratch resistance quite significantly with Ceramic Shield 2 for the front glass. 3 times better scratch resistance is a pretty substantial claim actually, and the back glass portion is now the first gen Ceramic Shield for 4 times better resistance to cracks. The 17 Pro's unibody metal frame now blends into the back of the phone too, like the pre-glass iPhones used to, and that should also help improve durability. There's a lot more metal now, and if you did happen to drop the phone, there's a lot less chance it'll shatter the glass. So overall, I'd say the 17 Pros are a lot more durable than last year's models. However, titanium is clearly the more premium material. Not everyone cares about high-end performance and stress testing these phones. So are you actually disappointed with this change? Something else I think is worth mentioning is that you will notice my 17 Pros still have the SIM card tray. In some regions, like here in the UK, we still have a physical SIM in addition to eSIM. And Apple has said that the eSIM only models, like in the US, will actually have a slightly larger battery, being able to use up that space previously taken by the SIM tray. Now, some will view the optional physical SIM as the better advantage. Others, probably most, will prefer to have the extra hour or 2 of battery life, and having this difference will inevitably cause some upset. I think ultimately it's not something that will affect the vast majority of people in any meaningful way. It's not like you can choose if your country has eSIM-only iPhones anyway, so it's not worth worrying about. Interestingly, the iPhone Air is eSIM-only in the UK, so I don't exactly know why the Pros aren't as well. But let me know in the comments, would you prefer to have an eSIM-only 17 Pro instead that offered better battery life? The design also affects the ergonomics. The size of the phones and even the weight has barely changed. They don't feel noticeably bigger or heavier at all, but they do feel different. Better, in fact. The edges are more rounded and therefore more comfortable in the hand, and the aluminium texture doesn't feel as oily or slippery as the titanium did, so I really like this change. This marks the first important difference between the Pro and the Pro Max. For those deciding between them, the Pro is a lot easier to hold, to fit in a pocket, and is a lot more comfortable to use. That's its key advantage besides being cheaper. Now, I want to circle back to scratching and durability because I'm sure you've seen the reports of the 17 Pros scratching rather easily at the edges of the camera bump. This is where the anodizing is weakest and does sadly leave them more prone to scratching and spoiling the aesthetic. If that's the kind of thing that would bother you, do consider this and maybe think about getting the white color option so it's less noticeable. If you are concerned about keeping your new iPhone safe, then of course the best way to protect it is to use a phone case. CASEKOO is sponsoring today's video, who not only have a new lineup of color-matching phone cases for the new 17 Pros, but offer the unique Magic Stand feature. This offers 360 degrees of rotation, satisfyingly snapping into place every 90, and the ring is adjustable up to 170 degrees both horizontally and vertically. So you can always get the perfect angle for watching videos, as a built-in tripod for taking photos, or for making video calls. MagSafe charging is fully compatible through the ring, so the case will still work with your magnetic chargers and accessories. And of course, the case offers excellent protection for your device. We've got cutouts tailored to the speakers, the camera control button, and the new camera bump. So any concerns over scratching this apparent weak spot are fully covered. CASEKOO is running a limited sale where you can get 15% off site-wide. So if you are looking to protect your new iPhone with a phone case, then I'll leave that linked down below for you to check out. Let's move on to the displays. The Pro once again has a 6.3-inch display, whilst the Pro Max is 6.9 inches. And the specs are almost identical to last year's, save for an increased peak brightness of 3000 nits, up from 2000, and we now have a more anti-reflective coating. Given how fantastic this is on Samsung's S25 Ultra, I was especially excited about this part. But unfortunately, the anti-reflection is much more subtle here. Perhaps you can spot the difference side by side. You'll only notice the increased peak brightness outdoors in sunlight, and even then it can be hard to tell any difference. What stands out more is the anti-reflective coating, bringing better contrast and bolder colours. Apple didn't say anything about the speakers this year, but to my ears the 17 Pros do sound a little bit richer and fuller. It's still a very subtle difference, I had to listen multiple times to really tell, but take a listen to these samples and let me know what you think. Now, performance is probably the area where we see the biggest improvement this year. Not only do we have Apple's new A19 Pro chipset, but also the new vapor chambers for cooling the phones and allowing better sustained performance. Apple claims 40% better. There's also a significant RAM increase up to 12GB from 8 previously. And on a smaller note, we get the new Bluetooth 6 up from 5.3, which as someone who enjoys Bluetooth earbuds and headphones, I'm really pleased to see. Putting that performance boost into numbers, here's how the phones compare with Geekbench. There's a roughly 10% boost for the single core and slightly higher on the multi-core score. But then for the GPU, there is a huge 40% increase in performance. Looking at the 3D Mark test, the scores almost double, so you're getting almost twice the frames per second when gaming with the new 17 Pros. But most impressive of all was the stress test, because the lowest score on both the 17 Pros was higher than the best score for the 16 Pros. That is absolutely wild. Now interestingly, the stability was slightly poorer here, and repeat testing showed this too. You could argue this actually speaks to poorer thermal management, but sustaining a much higher level of performance, you are likely to run hotter in the first place, so it's not easy to compare the thermal aspect exactly. Instead, I think looking at the scores and frame rates is the best indication of the performance change. And obviously the new 17 Pros blow the 16s out of the water. The sustained performance is clearly far better. Now, the phones felt fairly similar to me in terms of how hot they get. I have seen some thermal performance tests online showing mixed results, but most conclude that the 17 Pros do spread the heat out more evenly across the device. Either way, the combination of the new chipset and this vapor chamber clearly results in a pretty massive boost to performance. So for any gamers and high-end performance users, you will almost certainly see a big improvement with the new 17 Pros. And when Apple finally decides to put the intelligence in Apple Intelligence, the new phones should be a lot faster with delivering AI features as well. And for those wondering if the Pro Max is better than the Pro, perhaps because the vapor chamber could be larger, the answer is no. In fact, the Pro often clocked even better performance scores than the bigger Max. Battery life has been another major improvement this year. The batteries are bigger, and the stat that Apple typically uses to illustrate the improvement is video playback. You're getting an extra 4 hours there with the 17 Pros. Now, although pure video playback is an easy way to see the relative performance, obviously no one actually uses their phones in this way, and I prefer to test the battery life myself with more realistic use. So a mix of camera use, gaming, social media browsing, making calls, and I include a lot of screen off time as well. So having used the phones identically across a range of these situations, this is how the battery lives compared. There was a noticeable and substantial improvement to battery life. I was particularly impressed with the baseline Pro, which I found to outperform even last year's Pro Max, despite Apple's spec sheet suggesting that this would be the other way around. I bought brand new 16 Pros for this just to ensure 100% battery health as well. So these new A19 Pro chips and batteries are delivering vastly improved battery life, and it's particularly good news for those of you who prefer the smaller form factor of the Pro as opposed to the Pro Max. You don't have to go for the Max to get excellent all-day battery life. As I said last year, the 16 Pros didn't push the battery life that much further at all. It was roughly the same as the 15 Pros. So, if you've been waiting for a more substantial battery life improvement, that could be a good reason to skip getting a 16 and go straight for a 17 Pro instead. The batteries not only last longer, but they charge faster as well. Apple has increased the maximum power from around 30 watts up to 40 watts. This not only brings a faster 0 to 50%, but lower overall charging times as well. And once again, especially for the smaller Pro. This is still nothing compared to the leading Android phones, but a lot more respectable now. Moving on to the cameras, this is normally the aspect that people get most excited about, but this year sees only a minor camera improvement. Apple introduces a new high-res telephoto lens and the rebranded Fusion camera system to acknowledge the fact that all three rear cameras now use 48-megapixel lenses. The main and ultra-wides appear to be unchanged, but this new tele-lens has a larger sensor and a shorter focal length, making it the equivalent of a 4x zoom lens as opposed to the 5x we had with the 16 Pros. However, because you're now able to crop in on that high-res lens, Apple claims you'll get the equivalent of an 8x zoom at optical quality. It's the same thing they do on the main lens from 1 to 2x zoom. So comparing some main lens shots first, as expected, there was very little to separate the two phones. But we do have new processing with the new chipset, and one trend I did notice was a warmer white balance with the 17 Pros. Colours were usually a bit more saturated as well, but the phones really did switch in terms of which had higher contrast, brightness, and there was no apparent difference in terms of resolution or detail either. I think the main takeaway is that they were either pretty much identical, or at the very least the differences could easily be achieved by adjusting the photographic style. With the ultra-wide lenses, again, there was typically nothing substantial to separate them. Although more often I'd find the 16 Pros were actually a bit brighter, and occasionally the 17 Pro would offer much higher contrast with darker shadows. The colours were shifted more towards green as opposed to the pinker hues on the left as well. But what struck me was the consistency between the ultrawide and the main lens was actually better on last year's 16 Pros. I think Apple still has some tweaking to do with the 17 Pro's ultrawide processing, but right now there's a more jarring jump switching lenses on the new phones. In the 17 Pro's defense, I did occasionally see better detail here, though it was something I had to crop in very closely to actually spot. That could speak to improvement in the new image processing. With the telephoto lenses, you'll first notice the difference in focal length with the native 5x zoom versus 4x, but no real quality difference. Zooming into 10x, you may notice the extra sharpening with the 16 Pro, especially in the lines on the bricks and columns, and sometimes this works well. But cropping in closer, you can see that this is actually over-sharpening, and they've really toned this down with the 17 Pros. The new images look a lot cleaner, less noisy, and I was even seeing more shadow detail. Here with these main lens shots, I can see the warmer and bolder colours with the 17 Pros, but no other real differences in quality. Switching to 5x zoom and both telelenses, it's actually the other way around. At this point, the 17 Pro is actually cropping in slightly to match the 5x zoom of the 16 Pro. And if you had any concerns about any drop in quality, hopefully you can see that that's not the case at all. In fact, the 17 Pro actually looks even sharper without over-sharpening. The resolution seems a lot better, and I was consistently seeing this in the photos I've taken. If you were then concerned about losing quality further up the zoom range, here are some 10x shots where you can start to see the 16's heavier sharpening. And again, some people may prefer this to the more natural look of the 17 Pros. But maxing out the 16 Pro at 25x, you can see how the sharpening actually causes problems. There's noise, artifacts, and that oil painting-like effect. The 17 Pros are softer, but also a lot more natural looking and less noisy, and I personally think this looks much better. So if you had any concerns switching from a 5x to a 4x lens, you're absolutely not losing out in terms of quality at all. The new higher res lens is definitely an all-round upgrade. Also, the 17 Pro can now zoom further, up to 40x instead of 25x. Interestingly, it doesn't actually get that much closer to the subject. You can tell this through zooming in with the phone and seeing the zoom increments decreasing as you extend the zoom range. Looking at portrait mode, obviously at 4x zoom here, the 16 Pro is cropping in on the main lens and therefore looks kind of blurry compared to the 17 Pro. That's expected, but I'm showing this just to raise the point that the 17 Pro's shorter focal length actually gives more flexibility with framing, and it offers higher quality images across a wider zoom range. But switching to 5x, both phones are now using the telelens and both are doing an excellent job with the portrait effect, even picking up fine hairs on my head. However, cropping in close, you can see that the 17 Pro still gives better resolution and detail. Being able to crop in on that higher megapixel lens is a nice advantage. But what struck me more was the color processing. The 17 Pro colors are so warm, not just with my skin tone, but the background and my jacket as well. It looks like I'm using a photographic style here, but this is the stock settings. I've got to say that the 16 Pro colors are much more natural and realistic, so not everything is an upgrade, and that's something else I'd like to see Apple address. With macro shots, I really didn't see much of a change at all. There was certainly no clear winner, and I found either phone could take the better shot. It was often just a case of getting lucky with the focus. With video recording, there's essentially no change for the vast majority of people. We do have new pro recording features like ProRes RAW, Apple Log 2 and Genlock support, but those will only impact a small handful of professionals. With regular video recording, you're not going to notice any major difference, and it remains at market-leading quality. There's now a new video feature called Dual Capture, and this lets you record from both the selfie and rear cameras at the same time, and this could be a game changer for content creators. You don't get the two videos as separate files, you'll just get the one video with the selfie capture as picture-in-picture. So it slightly limits your creative freedom there, but also keeps things very simple. I can imagine this becoming an extremely popular feature, and it's going to make incessant concert filmers even more insufferable. With low light situations, again, very little has changed at all. In fact, I found it even harder to spot differences here. Whether it's the ultra-wide, main lens, or even the new telephoto lens, the phones pretty much matched last year's in terms of image quality. I was actually a little bit disappointed to see both phones overexposing and over-brightening nighttime shots. They're losing the natural darkness of the scene when left in auto mode. And despite the new larger sensor on the telelens, I didn't find this really lent itself to much better low-light performance. That being said, low-light performance is still up there with the best on the market, it just hasn't changed much compared to last year's phones. One improvement I did notice though was reduced flaring from bright lights. We saw this just now with still photos, but you can perhaps see it more clearly with these video samples. It could be due to better processing with the 17 Pros, but for whatever reason, they don't suffer as much with this problem. So here are some samples from the front-facing cameras where we do have some nice upgrades this year. We've got a new 18 megapixel center stage camera for the 17 Pros versus the 12 megapixel lens on the 16 Pros. But the most interesting part of this new lens is the square sensor, because this allows you to take landscape photo and video without having to rotate the phone. So this gives you much better framing options. For example, if you're taking group selfies, the phones can now automatically expand the frame to let you fit in more people. And you're now able to use center stage for video calls as well. Now, the selfie video is supposed to be ultra stabilized as well, so enjoy these clips of me running like an idiot comparing the two side by side. The most obvious difference in selfies now is the new wider framing with the 17 Pro, but I do think the images themselves look better as well. Obviously, being able to capture 18 megapixel selfies now as opposed to 12, you are getting higher resolution images, but really it's the new square sensor that's the game changer. And being able to hold your phone vertically and still capture group selfies or landscape video is a really nice upgrade. We tend to go through a cycle with iPhone upgrades, and this year we just didn't see that much of a change to the camera at all. The new selfie lens and its new features are pretty cool, but overall, this is a fairly minor camera update. I fully expected the prices to increase a lot this year, but actually they're the same as last year. Kind of. The caveat being the base 17 Pro now also starts at 256GB of storage. That means the starting price is $10.99, whilst the Max starts at $11.99. So I guess that's bad news for people like me who liked the cheaper 128GB model, but with the whole tariff situation, I'm actually just pleased we didn't see any crazy price hikes. If you're one of those people that needs a huge amount of on-device storage, you can also get a 2TB version, but only of the Pro Max. Just make sure you've got the $2,000 needed to buy it. I think overall this year's upgrade has been one of the more iterative changes. The display, speakers and camera are all mostly the same. The design is a bit different, sure, but unless you care about high-end performance, then I think you could reasonably argue either way as to whether the switch from titanium to aluminium was a good thing. What this year's upgrades clearly focused on was the performance, and that aspect is very impressive, both the speed and the processing capabilities as well as the battery life. And actually, battery life is typically one of the more important aspects for people, so this might actually push you towards a new 17 Pro. They charge a lot faster, and they last a lot longer. So it might be fair to say that this is a boring but practical upgrade this year. The battery is what tends to slow over time and force you into an upgrade. So for those choosing between a 16 and 17 Pro, especially those who keep their phone for 3 or 4 or even more years, it might make sense for you to go for the newest models. Obviously, if you have a 16 or even a 15 Pro already, I can't see anything super exciting or compelling to warrant an upgrade this year, but it does depend on your personal priorities. Hopefully this video has highlighted the differences to help you make that decision for yourself. For those struggling to choose between a Pro or a Pro Max, honestly, just go to an Apple store or ask a friend to hold them both in your hands. You'll very quickly be able to tell which one feels comfortable and which display you like the look of more. The battery life is so good, even on the smaller Pro now, that I don't think it should be a concern, and that's absolutely the phone that I'd personally choose of the two. I think the more interesting question is whether to get a Pro at all, especially with what the new Air and the base iPhone 17 are offering. The most compelling reasons to go for the Pro model instead are now gone. That's how much Apple improved the regular 17 this year. So do check out my in-depth comparison of the entire lineup where I'll explore this fully, which, if it's not already live on the channel, then it will be very soon. As I said, I hope this video has been helpful in highlighting the differences between this year's and last year's phones, and in helping you choose which phone to go for. And if it has, please give this video a like to let me know. Do also subscribe and make sure to hit the bell icon to turn on notifications, and that way you'll be notified when those other iPhone videos go live. Leave any further questions you still have in the comments. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll hopefully see you next time. Yeah, man. Come say hello. Come say hello.